Welcome to the Gaslight Effect Podcast and to this limited series, Conversations at the Edge. This series grew out of an ongoing conversation with my dear friend Lynn Redleaf about her deep belief in the power of dialogue across divides and how difficult and rare this type of dialogue is in our world today. Lynn's encouragement and support have made these podcast episodes possible. Together, we keep returning to the same question. What does it take to stay engaged with one another when conversations move into charged, uncertain, or deeply divided territory? As co-founder of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and ambassador for the University of Peace, I'm deeply mindful of my responsibility to use the mindsets and tools of emotional intelligence to practice peace daily, not only in my relationships, but as a contribution to peace in the wider world. At the heart of this series is a belief that we need to be able to talk about anything we want to talk about as human beings, as long as the conversation is grounded in dignity and respect. Making space for another person's ideas does not mean agreeing with them. It means doing our best to understand them and allowing those ideas to exist without erasing, attacking, or diminishing the other. Across these episodes, I'm joined by thought leaders who are, in their own ways, examining how we engage across differences. You'll hear from journalists who have built relationships across political divides, educators, community builders working within schools and local institutions, a researcher exploring how hope and despair shape conflict, and a young voice offering first-hand perspective on navigating disagreement and identity today. Difficult conversations can often result in gaslighting, although sometimes they never even progress that far. My hope is that these episodes offer not just perspective, but a different way of showing up, one that resists manipulation, makes room for humanity and complexity, and keeps connection intact even at the edge. Thank you for joining us for this new series. Welcome to the Gaslight Effect Podcast and our limited series, Conversations at the Edge. This is a series about staying grounded, curious, and connected during moments of deep division, like right now in our world. Today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Oded Adomi Leshem, whose work explores the human capacity to stay open, ethical, and hopeful in times of conflict. So, Oded, glad that you are here, so glad.
Thanks for inviting me, Robin.
And I would love for you to tell our listeners all about yourself rather than my reading your bio, which is too extensive for someone to just listen to without it coming from you. So please.
Right. So, yeah, I could say several things. Perhaps the most important is that I'm a senior researcher at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and I've been studying hope for more than a decade. So I look at hope both from a philosophical perspectives, so kind of asking the big questions of what is the role of hope in our lives? How does it manifest? Does it actually have any impact, a real tangible impact? Or is it just a slogan or romanticized idea, right? But I mainly focus on hope as a psychological construct. So as a mental construct, I work at the psychology department at the Hebrew U, and this is where we try to actually understand how hope functions, you know, mentally. And I offer some model to understand hope. Maybe we could chat about it later. But perhaps for me, the most important thing is Hope's social and political contexts. So I'm interested in how Hope functions on the social and political level. Does it drive social change? We are living now in an era of really so many crises, right? Real threat to democracy, conflict is emerging, environmental problems are real, and so people really feel hopeless and overwhelmed by these crises. And the question is, can we and how do we actually use hope effectively to challenge these crises and try to overcome them.
Well, I'm so honored to meet you. And actually, when you were talking about your work, I really felt unexpectedly emotional about your commitment to hope because I think my greatest fear for this time in our world is that people are losing hope. And without hope, like how do you move forward? Right. So I'm so grateful that you're doing this work and so moved by it. And I'm ready to now move to Israel and come and work with you. And so but I really mean it. It's beautiful that that's what you're focusing on in your work. First of all, I want to talk about your book. So, Hope Amidst Conflict. Tell us a little bit about your book, and then I'll go into my questions. Because thank you for writing.
Yeah, this book in many ways accumulates my work on hope situated in intractable violent conflict. So perhaps the most devastating circumstances, this is where I try to understand what hope is and how it functions. And for me, it has two purposes. One, if we really want to understand hope, or any mental construct, we need to look at it when it is most challenged, right? So, how does hope function in the dire circumstances of entrenched, violent conflict? That will tell us a lot about hope, right? But the second, I think, aim is to really help. I live in Israel. I care about this place very much, and care for the well-being of Israeli and Palestinian children living here in the Holy Land. And for me, what I want to do is use hope and understand how to actually uh, use it effectively to promote peace and conciliation in the region and the end of this dreadful conflict that has been going on for too long. And this book accumulates these studies. So I'm mostly a quantitative researcher. So most of the things there are also some statistical models when we measure hope for peace and kind of try to identify its determinants and also its potential outcomes. Um, but it's also a philosophical exploration on the role of hope in conflict. And I'm happy to say, by the way, that there is another book contract underway with Oxford University Press, which even actually expands the question of hope to other uh, global challenges. So there we ask, does hope actually drive social change? And if so, under what conditions? So this is like a new project and just recently announced that the contract is on the way. So I'm very.
Congratulations and mazel tov on your new contract. And I have a question. If I can ask you a personal question, what drew you to this work? Like, how did you get to be a hope researcher and located in Israel?
Yeah, so I actually came to academia in a relatively late stage in my life. And before that, I was a documentary filmmaker. I was a news cameraman covering conflict and war here in the region and did also other things. And one of the things that I was involved in is a very special initiative, a humanitarian initiative that helped sick Palestinian kids get medical treatment in Israel. So the hospitals and the medical conditions in the Palestinian territories are not as good. And many years ago, when the Oslo Accords were happening, there was some sort of arrangement between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government that certain Palestinian kids with severe illness could get their treatment in Israel, and the Palestinian Authority would cover for the expenses, but the medical staff here in Israel will treat them. And this is a really beautiful program. Many Palestinian kids benefited from that, but the problem is that they didn't have any way to travel from the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, into Israel proper. And so I was part of this initiative of drivers that we were just doing that transportation. And this experience gave me the opportunity to speak to Palestinians, usually kids and their parents or their family members that accompany them to get, surgery or other medical treatments. And one of the really exceptional opportunities that I had is to meet a woman named Ibtisam, and she was an aunt of then he was a 13-year-old kid that need to get a bone marrow transplant. And we were talking, and she was from Gaza. And we were talking about, and she spoke excellent English, and we were talking about, politics and social issues in Palestine, in Israel, and the conflict. And she said something really remarkable that in many ways kind of sparked my curiosity into hope. She said, I really have very strong hopes for peace and conciliation and the ending of this conflict. Uh, for the benefit of everyone living here. And for me, it was very strange because she was talking about her hope for peace, even though she was living in the Gaza Strip, which, of course, now, but also then was really people there living in very, very harsh conditions, conditions of conflict and other, poverty and other huge problems. And I was thinking, how could it be that sometimes people that come from more marginalized societies they have the greatest hopes. While people that live in relatively advantaged situations sometimes are more skeptical or cynical, about the future. And that led me to my first question, what is the relationship between reality and people's hope? So does it necessarily mean that if your situation is good, then you're more hopeful? Not necessarily. Sometimes the hope comes from crisis, from being in a inferior position, from struggles. And the second question is kind of how do you measure hope? So hope is a very abstract idea, but for me as a researcher, I want to make it concrete and I want to know how to measure it and use it empirically. So these two kind of questions led me to study hope, and I have to say that though I study hope, and I now established at the Hebrew University a new center called the International Hub for Hope Research, where we have students and myself are exploring these questions about hope in social contexts. Um, I'm actually more and more fascinated by this idea. So I'm just in the beginning, I think, just in the beginning of my exploration into this very fuzzy kind of concept.
That's really fabulous story and beautiful story about the woman you met and what she shared with you. Do you think when you look back that you were a hopeful person growing up? What did your parents teach you about
That's a good question. So we know that, there's what's called trait hope, right? So this is like a personal characteristic of someone, a personality trait that some people are more hopeful than others, and there is a lot of work on that from the perspective of positive psychology, and this is Rick Snyder and Seligman and other prominent scholars who studied the tendency to be hopeful or unhopeful or hopeless.
Mhm.
And there's a parallel, by the way, there's a parallel study of optimism and pessimism, which sometimes overlap with hope and sometimes don't. But for me, the question, I mean, I take it from the personal level and try to apply it on the social level. So, of course, there are some people more hopeful and others less so, right, in terms of their personality. But the question is, what happens on the social level? Can we measure hope on the collective level? And so this was kind of my what I want to specialize in. Most of the research on hope is on the individual level. So hope for personal well-being, health, a lot of work on hope and health research, which is very important, nursing, palliative medicine, and other projects about, hope for prosperity, hope for family. But I am taking it to other questions like hope for democracy, hope for peace, hope for equality. So this is my specialty. So I kind of diverted from your question
You
because
did.
it's hard for
It was just,
me.
that's okay. I was going to go back to it. Do you think that hope was a word that was used a lot in your family? Did
Hmm.
your family was it at the kitchen table? Did you talk about what your hopes were? Tell us.
I think it's a good question, and I might answer it from the reverse, meaning that like being pessimistic is something we could not afford.
Can you say more about that? What do you mean you could not afford?
So, life has many challenges on many, many levels, and everybody deals with them. And when you are pessimist or skeptical, you kind of give up and do not confront these challenges, do not try to address them. And I think my parents and my upbringing was this kind of there's no pessimism. Like pessimism is and hopelessness is something we need to overcome. Not allowed, but something that one needs to overcome. And we are not privileged enough to be pessimist. It takes a
Hmm.
certain privilege, right? Everything is so dandy and nice in your life, you could be more pessimistic about the future. But is people who strive for things, people who dream, they need hope. So I think let's say that we were encouraged to be dreamers.
Ah, I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful. And what was something that you dreamed about that you were hopeful for when you began this work?
Hmm. So so again, I think I always have kind of two motivations. The first one, and for me the most important one, is the what let's call it tikkun olam, right? Let's call it, repairing the world. There
Mhm.
are so many problems. There are so many grievances. There are so many, uh, problems in the world, and I want to contribute to solving them. I don't think I will be the only one who solves them, but I want to contribute something to their solution and to help people around the world who struggle for, equality or struggle, people are living under oppressive regimes, people are living under extreme poverty, people are living, under very extreme situations. And I think, I don't know, we have some obligation to help. So this is kind of my first motivation. And then if I could use hope and teach about it and understand how to use it effectively in all sorts of struggles for social change, then I could contribute to that. And the second is more motivation, is an intellectual motivation. It's kind of what is this thing? What is hope? Wow, this kind of like we use it offhandedly so much, and we use it as a romanticized slogan, right? Like, you need to be hopeful, or let's keep on hoping, or whatever. But that's not really hope. And so, kind of diving intellectually into this question of hope is still one of my greatest motivation. And I have to say that one of the nice things that happened to me while writing the book is that I kind of went a little bit outside of psychology, my core discipline and social psychology, into the world of the philosophy about hope. And then you learn a lot of things. For example, most of the philosophical explorations about hope talked about the negative sides of hope and talk about the dangers and the pitfalls of hope. And I found that not only fascinating, but actually very helpful.
Thank you for talking about yourself. And I too am driven by Tikkun Olam. It's what drives my work. I use the word hope very often, and interestingly enough, and this is a little digression, so I'll come back to it. I'm working now on a new book about promises, and
Mm,
in this book, when you promise something, you're projecting yourself into the future, right? And it is really interesting to think about hope in that way as well, because the hope is future oriented as well. And there's a lot of power in that. You kind of do it like perhaps it's a speech act, as a linguist might say. It's when you are hopeful for something, you are somewhat there, like you're on your way. And I wonder then, well, two things in the region where in Israel, where there's so much anger and distrust, how do you help people uh, to talk with one another so that perhaps the emotionally charged narratives that shape people's inner reality can be softened, can be influenced by hope, and also I would like to get back to what you said about the danger of hope too. So
Yeah, so I will start with a question about the region and really the great mistrust and animosity between the two sides, and this is understandable. Really, the suffering and the casualties and the destruction is real, right? So it makes sense. For me, I would say that I approach it um, in a kind of practical way. So for me, let's say our target is, I don't know, some peace agreement, right? Some conflict resolution agreement that will address the needs of both people and make them prosper and live safely in this land, right? Whatever configuration, there are many like policy-oriented configuration, two-state and confederate, but I don't. For me, as long as it addresses the needs of both peoples, I'm for it. And so, how do we convince people that this peace is something desirable? And this is actually pertains to how we understand hope. So usually, hope is not a unidimensional construct, mental construct. It's actually a bidimensional mental construct that has two separate. They are actually also correlated, but two separate dimensions. The first is what we call the expectation dimension, and that relates to our assessment of possibility, right? So what are the chances are, and the more we assess the chances for the outcome as greater, the more hopeful we are, right? And that's one dimension. And many times people try to convince Israelis and Palestinians on that dimension, saying, no, it's possible. There are people on the other side that you could talk to, etc. Okay, which is, of course, important. But the second dimension, and we found that actually this dimension has more impact on social change, is what we call the wish dimension. And the wish dimension relates to the extent we desire something, we aspire for something, how much we dream of it, how committed we are to a goal, regardless of how likely it is, regardless of the expectation dimension. And what we see that for Israelis and Palestinians across time, because we measure hope for peace in conflict zones around the world, including among Palestinians in the Palestinian territories and Jewish Israelis in Israel, and we see that there is a decline not only on the expectation dimension. So it's not only that people think that peace is less and less likely, there's also a decline in the wish dimension. So people think that peace is less and less desirable. And we saw it even before the war. So one of the things we want to do is make peace a desirable goal again, right? And make it something that people would aspire for. And we have all sorts of techniques and the experimental interventions that we're trying to see how do we promote that dimension. And this is true, by the way, for many social struggles. That if you are, we want to increase the desirability of the outcome, not only the belief that it could be reached. And so this is one of the projects that we're looking at. And For me, how to get there is it's a secondary question. So is it with dialogue? Is it for self-interest? So maybe, it's for self-interest that each group needs to make some, concessions or make up because it's in their self-interest. I believe it is, by the way. I believe also morally that peace is something desirable, and also in terms of self-interest. It will be better for both societies to live in peace and conciliation between them.
Can I ask you a question that speaks to what you're talking about now? You write in your book that certain kinds of rhetoric can cement themselves into public sentiment. Is that what you were finding, that the lack of desire for peace was beginning to cement? I wonder if you feel like there is some kind of an emotional manipulation by leaders of those areas that perhaps is related to the gaslight effect on a collective level.
So, do leaders manipulate us? Certainly, right? So, they are trying to change people's hearts and minds by all sorts of rhetoric and speeches and talking about things and not talking about others. Of course, this is something that we need to be aware of, and we should not be naive about that. And in terms of, if I look back here in Israel, you could see that extremist um, sectors of society or leaders in both societies have deliberately eroded this idea that peace is something that is desirable and we should at least aspire for, even though it's hard to get. It's a worthy cause. And so there's a deliberate erosion of the worthiness of peace or conciliation or any agreement across, and this is done by leaderships.
And that is such a travesty, such a travesty. And how do you counter that in the population?
Right. So what we found is that even peace advocates, when they talk about peace, it could be international advocates or local, doesn't matter. When they talk about peace or agreement or some sort of, conciliation process, they don't talk about it in inspiring ways. They talk about it in a very technical ways. So more like policy oriented. The borders will be here, the population will be such and such, the security measures will be this and that, which is very hard to, so it doesn't actually touch people's hearts anymore. And they also forget to talk about the fruits of peace. And when I say the fruits of, meaning that, if we want people to go after some goal, we have to know how to articulate how great it will be when this goal will be achieved. Right? And many times we forget it. We forget it also when people talk about democracy or people talk about, in a sustainable environment. We talk about the problems, we talk about the dangers, we talk about the threats a lot. We forget to talk how great it will be when these things are going to be solved, and talk about them in inspiring ways, in uplifting ways that will connect people.
So you're talking about like this abstract concept of hope, and yet your work is about specifically making it specific and measurable. How do you do that? Is it in these different ways, what you will see as a result of hope? I mean, I'm also thinking not only of the group and the sociology of it, but as also the psychology of it. Even with couples, how do you have hope when there is dysfunction, dysregulation, disputes, disagreements? How do you have hope, and what is it going to look like, and what happens? You answer because you're the expert.
So I think dividing hope into its two dimensions, the wish dimension and the expectation dimension, is really helpful, both on an analytical kind of when you try to analyze hope and how hope functions, but also on a more kind of practical way that could help maybe practitioners or therapists that are working, you are working with couples and you're working on abusive relationship and you're working on, and so for So I'll give you an example, right? So someone could say, um, I really hope our relationship will improve, but I have no hope it will be improved. What does this person mean? I really hope, meaning I wish, I desire, this is my aspiration that we will manage things and our relationship will improve. But I have no hope, meaning I think the chances are slim, right? So the first part of the sentence was about the wish dimension, right? The aspiration, the dream. And the second was about the expectation dimension, or assessment of likelihood. And many times in our life, we kind of tend to stick to the expectation dimension. And so we say, is it likely? What are the chances? And if they are not big, then we give up, right? But many times, people, the great thing about humans, for good and for bad, is that we achieve things against the odds, right? Think about so many things that humans have achieved. Like I always give this example of flying. We're not supposed to fly. Humans don't have wings. So under any no conditions, we're not supposed to fly. Still, we fly airplanes and space. How come? Why is that? Because the desires and aspirations of people have looked to the stars and the skies for thousands of years, and their aspirations and hopes to touch the clouds and touch the sky were so strong, right? So, and it took a lot of time, right? It took centuries, but at the end, now we fly. So people's desires and dreams sometimes are so powerful that they achieve things against the odds. And perhaps couples, I don't know. And again, you're the expert. I'm not in any way a clinician. But perhaps when you talk and when you also talk about how much do you want it, how much actually do you want it, how much do you want and desire this relationship to work, and it's okay not to. And then we need to find other ways. But if this desire and wish is strong and honest, then we could start working on that. And so we're basing our hope on the wish dimension, not necessarily the chances. We're actually not thinking about the chances, right? If the great people that created, or the great inventors or the great, social leaders that did these amazing things, if they like think about women's struggle for equality. What are the chances that women will have equal rights as men after tens of thousands of years of male dominance? Nothing,
It's a great example. Yes.
right? But still, it happened, and of course, there's more to be done. But it happened because of courageous women that that didn't ask what are the chances. They just did it, and they did it because their aspirations and dreams and wishes and desires were so strong and unquestionable, right? They achieved this, and we're talking about other social struggles. So perhaps one of the questions when we need to talk about hope, when you take it to the therapy room or you take it to the therapeutic world, is let's assess how much do we actually want that.
So when I see couples, it's my first question. How much do you want this relationship? Each one
Mm,
of you.
yeah, and it's a fair something to say. Not very much,
That's
right?
exactly
And
right.
that's it takes a lot of courage.
Yes. So if you were in total control of the future, which would be lovely, given that you lead with hope, what specifically can we do to help societies and groups who are so entrenched move away from nothing will ever change to something new is possible? Is it that dimensionality? Is it moving from expectation to desire?
So it's a good question because we also don't want to be naive, right? So it's very important in every challenge that we address to look at reality in the eye and assess it as it is. We don't want to paint reality in rosy colors or dismiss challenges just because we want something badly, right? We need to look at reality as it is. And real hope does not in any way diminish the harsh circumstances of reality. Okay, that's one thing. So to be honest about reality. And then to know how to articulate your dreams and visions and aspirations, right? The wish dimensions in inspiring ways. And uh, one of the reasons that I have a dream, Martin Luther King's speech has become such iconic is because he's doing exactly that, right? In the early 60s, he's telling us what's going to happen. He's saying that kids are going to play together in playgrounds in Alabama or Georgia, right? He articulates how the future will look like. And that's a nice future. That's a good future. So he gives us something to hang on to. And we forget that many times, and again, I'm talking about social issues. We forget that many times. When people talk about, um, the disasters that are happening to our environment, most of the efforts are on the hazards and how dreadful, climate change and pollution, which is very true, which of course is very true. But if we only focus on that and if we only talk about the threats, we have nothing to, there's no inspiration there. It's just fear and doom and gloom. And we forget to say, listen, and to give like uh, images, actual images of how a clean earth would be and how what advantages and benefits and dividends we will actually get. And that's something that for me, when you're talking about big social change or the challenges, like this is my bit to help articulate. And actually we're doing experiments where kind of when it comes to hope for peace, we're doing a competition between all sorts of fruits, possible fruits of peace, and then seeing which of them actually changes people's hearts and minds, for a long time. And then when we know, we could say, okay, when you talk about peace, talk about, you know, common serenity. This is the best, the most effective fruit. So always say that thing when you talk about peace. It will engage people, inspire people. They are looking for this type of fruit, and you could do it for any social issue. You could do it for the environment. You could do it about equality, racial problems. The U.S. and other parts of the world are facing real threats to democracy. How do you do that? Anti-Semitism. Don't only talk about the problems, talk about how beautiful it will be and how great and how beneficial it will be for everyone when, anti-Semitism is reduced or Islamophobia is reduced. It doesn't matter, right?
So earlier you said there were dangers. So this picture you're painting for me. I want it. I mean, who wouldn't want it, right? It's just very compelling. Um, what's the danger? What's the danger of putting it out there?
Right. So first of all, we know that hope comes with pain. We're used to think about hope as something like, like a synonym to joy and happiness. No, hope is something that is it's a difficult thing to carry. It's a burden sometimes. Skeptical people or pessimists, they have it relatively easy because there's no anxiety there. It's the hopeful people that have and the more you hope, the more like anxious you are to reach your goals. And of course, there is the danger of dashed hopes and then greater frustrations. And Nietzsche, not a very optimistic guy, but he said, hope is the worst of all evils because it prolongs man's suffering. And there is some sense to that. So the first thing to understand is that hope is not something easy to carry. Something we need it, but it's not a picnic. Okay, it's different. And I will, by your permission, also kind of say that one of the things, up until 4 months ago, there were Israeli hostages in the Gaza Strip. And think about the hopes of the families to see their loved ones again when they have no clue where they are and they're worried sick about their conditions. And that's not an easy thing to do. To wake up every morning and to hope is, sometimes it's easier to let go, right? And be skeptical and say, there's no use, and then it reduces the burden. And in the big demonstrations in Israel that called for the end of the war and the hostage deal, which were the demonstrations were huge, huge. The families came and talked. They made speeches, the families of the hostages, and they said, "You are the ones, you," and they were talking to the crowd. "You are the ones who are helping us carry this hope, because without you, we would give up." So again, this idea of hope is like it's a burden and we need to take it, right? But it's not. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that, again, hope could be tied to being naive, painting reality in rosy colors. Descartes, the great philosopher, he said that hope is this human tendency to believe that what we wish for would actually transpire. But based on what exactly, right? So who said? Says who? And this is Descartes and his very, analytical frames. So this idea that hope could be tied to being naive and not looking reality in the eye, right? And really doing a real assessment of the problems, that's the second thing. And the third thing, by the way, is more from the like you know psychological aspect. Is hope is a elaborate mental construct that takes a lot of mental energy. So like fear, that doesn't take much mental effort, right? Very fast, unconscious, primary habits,
Automatic, yes.
automatic. Hope is very deliberate, and we need to imagine a different future, which is different, difficult. We need to imagine a positive future, and we know we are attracted to the like negativity bias. So we worry. It's easier to worry than to hope. And the third thing, you need to plan how to get there. So that's a lot of mental effort, and that's a disadvantage because we want hope to be easy, but it's not.
But what a world if everybody had hope, right? What a world.
Yeah, I think, by the way, it's important to acknowledge that some people might have hopes for an opposite goal. So, for example, some people, including myself, I hope for, strong, healthy democracies when, people have freedom and people have equal rights and there's no social or racial biases. And, this is my hope. But there might be some people who, no, they don't hope for that. They want a religious autocracy or, and so these hopes collide.
And we can hope on your side and my side that we can change the minds of the people who are hoping on the other side.
Right? Or, right? Exactly.
But yes, well, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'd love to ask that you, just before we say goodbye for now, what are you hoping for specifically in this year, 2026?
Right. So I will say, and again, I'm kind of looking at two things. First of all, in terms of what's happening in Israel and around the world. So, for me, finding a solution to the conflict which is fair and just and provide security for all living here in the Holy Land is perhaps the most important goal. And in Israel, there's also a very strong threat to democracy coming from the current government. And I hope elections are coming, and I hope we could replace this government. But this is something true around the world. So no one asked us in what historical era we're going to live in, right? We were born into a certain story, and we happen to kind of live and act and work in an era of democratic backsliding. And I think we have an obligation to look forward and try to strengthen the values that we believe in. So that is one thing. And on a more professional kind of outlook, I just established the Hope Hub a year and a half ago. And I have some students and we're doing really great but one of the things I want to do is expand the Hope Hub and get more international students, more scholarships and fellowships, and kind of enhance our work. We have really, really cool projects. We're examining hope across cultures and religions. We are looking at the rhetoric, like you said, there's like rhetoric of leaders that could be skeptical or hopeful, and we're using now AI capabilities to extract hopeful and hopeless expressions from leaders' speeches, and we're doing like
Wow, how
many,
wonderful.
many projects.
Wonderful. So where can people find you, Oded?
Yeah, they could look at my website, Oded Adomi Leshem, and the website is called Rethink Hope, and it focuses on the Hope Hub and what we're doing there, the research projects, the talks and speeches I give about hope in Israel and across the world, and other activities that we do. So you are very welcome to visit the website, and maybe when I come to the East Coast, I'll drop by and say hello,
Oh,
Robin.
I was going to invite you. We're kidding. That's so a couple of things that I want to say, but first I just want to thank you for this beautiful hour of hope, of giving hope to so many. But it's really been a joy to be with you, and I so admire and respect and am moved by your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining me for today's episode. I hope you found it helpful and meaningful. If you want to listen to other episodes of the Gaslight Effect Podcast, you can find them at robinstern.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. And please leave a rating and a review. I also invite you to follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm so grateful to have many people supporting me, and especially grateful for all of you, my listeners.